Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all you are doing fine. This is the next part of Magus of the Wizarding World. So let's start without any delay. Chapter 51, Golden Trio 2. After Matthew returned home, he continued with his research on the soul inside the strange stone. He almost completed everything he wanted to this summer. There was only one event he had to visit the alley for once again. This specific event would ensure him a lot of political influence and support in the future. All he had to do was to invest a few hours. But that happened only in a few days, so Matthew had a lot of free time. All he could do was research at the moment, and the only thing of real research value at the moment was the stone. Through his experimentations, he managed to develop a spell that allows him to differentiate between humans, animals, and other souls. With this new data, he improved his sonar spell and added a soul search modification to the spell. This allowed him not only to see with the spell but also locate living things and identify what kind of living being it was. He even managed to differentiate between different animal species. Since he located a few in the garden and used them for his experiments. To complete the spell, he now only needed to scan different animals which he would add to his database so he could identify the specific animal in the future. But his main focus on this kind of research was to find a method to strengthen his soul, by absorbing or devouring other souls. Unfortunately, it wouldn't work with animal souls since they were too different from humans and had lots of energy particles in them that were incompatible with humans. The soul part in the stone should be compatible even though it wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal either. But the soul was far more powerful than his own at the moment and would instead devour his. So his research on a soul strengthening technique hit a wall that could be only overcome through better research subjects. But he couldn't just go and kidnap innocent people and experiment on them. He wasn't a psychopath. So he would have at least waited a year before he could continue with these experiments, since then he would be able to gain a research object. So in the end he decided to focus his research on other topics related to souls, like how to control them or to better understand them. And so the next few days would pass. Scene break. Wednesday, the 31st of July, 1991. Today was the day Matthew would visit Diagon Alley again, to place himself in Harry's good graces. Harry had his 11th birthday today and was visited by Hagrid at midnight in the lighthouse where Harry and the Dursleys fled from the Hogwarts letters. He had already learned of his wizarding heritage and the truth about the death of his parents by now. It was already late morning. Hagrid and Harry started early in the morning and would need around 4 hours from the hut on the rock to Diagon Alley in London. So they should arrive around lunch and would first visit Gringotts. After preparing himself and a nice breakfast, Matthew opened once again a portal and travelled with 2 jumps to the back alley of the Leaky Cauldron. He arrived around lunchtime in the alley. His best chance to meet Hagrid and Harry and get a quick scan on the Philosopher's Stone at the same time would be if he randomly met them in Gringotts. To not miss them, he entered a store close to the entrance of the Leaky Cauldron and waited there pretending to browse the goods while keeping an eye on the entrance. Matthew hadn't to wait long. After a few minutes the entrance from the cauldron formed into an archway, and the beardy figure of Hagrid, who was twice as large as a normal, stepped through it while saying something to a person behind him with an excited smile. He probably said welcome to Diagon Alley. Since this was one of the iconic scenes from the books and the movies, Matthew remembered it very well. Behind Hagrid followed the small dark-haired figure of Harry, who watched everything with an awed face. After Harry watched the entrance close again, they walked further into the alley in direction of Gringotts. Matthew trailed slowly with a bit distance behind them, as they entered the white marble building of Britain's only wizarding bank, he decided to wait a few minutes before he followed them into the bank, since he wanted to only meet them when they left the bank. As Matthew entered the bank, he approached leisurely the usual counter for withdrawal and slowly handled his business. He earned another 300 galleons since he withdrew some money last weekend for his Hogwarts shopping. As he finished his business and was about to leave, he spotted the large figure of Hagrid, who looked pale, because of the wild cart ride, who was followed by Harry. Matthew approached them. "Hello, Hagrid, nice to see you. Are you okay? You look somewhat pale." He greeted them as he mentally requested Sarah use every available scanning tool we have and scan the objects inside Hagrid's mantle. Unfortunately, he couldn't touch the stone since Hagrid would absolutely forbid it, and that would alarm Dumbledore. So he had to use only the simple energy and radiation scanners of the AI chip, but that would give him some data to work with and plan his further steps. Task confirmed. Beginning scan. Multiple objects found. Beginning detailed scan. Estimated finishing time, 3 minutes 19 seconds. The host needs to stay in scanning range. No problem, thought Matthew as he waited for Hagrid to reply. "Oh, Matthew, nice to see ye outside Hogwarts. I'm a bit unwell because of these damn carts," replied Hagrid a bit sickly, while turning to Harry. "Harry, this is Matthew Mason. He is a Ravenclaw student at Hogwarts." "Matthew, this is Har," began Hagrid to introduce them as Matthew interrupted him. "Harry Potter. I know. Nice to see you. I told you, Harry, we would see each other soon again," said Matthew as he grinned at the younger boy. "The boy from the zoo. You are a wizard," replied a bit shocked Harry. "Yup. Just like you," answered Matthew with a grin. "You know each other?" asked an exhausted Hagrid, who stared down at the two boys. "Yes, we met each other this year in the zoo in London. Harry here performed a nice feat of accidental magic and freed a boa constrictor who scared his cousin. The boy deserved it," retold Matthew as he explained their first meeting. Suddenly he heard Sarah's mechanical voice in his mind. Beep. Scan complete. Uploading gathered and analyzed data. That's interesting, thought Matthew as he comprehended the new data until he got his thoughts interrupted by Hagrid's reply. "Well, that was probably well deserved. The Dursley is a horrible bunch of people," said the exhausted Hagrid while smiling at Harry, who nodded a bit shyly. "Hagrid, how about you go to the cauldron and rest a bit and I help Harry with his shopping? You seem to be a bit exhausted from the cart ride. How about we meet in 2.5 hours outside Ollivander's?" suggested Matthew with a nice smile. "It would be nice if ye could do that for me. And Harry would learn a bit from another student," replied Hagrid as we left the bank. After confirming that Harry was fine with it, he left for the cauldron and Harry and Matthew remained behind. For 10+ advanced chapters, check out my Patreon. https://www.patreon.com/Arrowinmyknee. Comment. 48 comments. Vote. 1 left. Chapter 52, Golden Trio 3. So Harry, what do you think of the Wizarding World? How is your first impression? Began Matthew as he guided the younger boy further into the alley. It's all so fascinating. I would have never believed that magic is real. I felt my whole life like something was missing and now it's there. But at the same time, I am a bit scared about the expectations people have of me. After all, I am just Harry, not some amazing Dark Lord killing hero. The other students will probably have far more knowledge of magic than me. After all, I never knew of magic until today," replied Harry while blurting his whole bandwidth of emotions out. "Ha ha, don't worry just Harry," joked Matthew, "I like you grew up in the non-magical world, in the muggle world like wizards call it. And you won't be behind the students who grew up in the magical world. They grew up with magic, for them magic is something like radios, cars or a stove is for us. Magic is so normal for them that they don't have the fascination we possess. The students you could be behind are rather the ones like me, the smart book-loving ones. They will absorb every piece of this new kind of force in their lives. As for you being just Harry, don't worry too much. Although you will have to live with their stares and odd expressions, you will find also true friends who will give you a new home, and learn who you truly are." "You are probably right," replied Harry, visibly relaxed as we arrived at Madame Mackin's robes for all occasions. "That's our first stop, Harry. You can buy your robes here. I would recommend you to buy yourself some free time clothes. Your relatives seem to be disgusting humans, to only give you hand-downs. Just keep them in your trunk while you stay with them and they wouldn't know. Your parents probably left you enough money for this kind of stuff. I will get you a trunk while you are there. Let's meet here again when we are finished," explained Matthew while smiling. After Harry entered the store, Matthew headed to the trunk store where he bought his trunk and got for him a regular trunk with expanded inside, anti-theft, and shrinking enchantments. 20 minutes late he arrived again at Madame Mackin's robes for all occasions, where he waited for a few minutes until Harry also came out. "Got your clothes? Good. Here, this is a trunk with expanded insides and some safety measures. There is also an enchantment on it that lets it change its size on command. See that way? Put your clothes inside and we head for our next stop," explained to Matthew as he shows Harry how the trunk works and store his new clothes inside. They continued in direction of Slugs and Jigger's apothecary, but suddenly Harry had a strange question. "Are there different kinds of wizards?" asked the boy. "So he still met Draco. Seems he will land in Gryffindor," mused Matthew while he decided on how to reply. "There are a certain group of wizards who have this kind of view, that these so-called pure-blood wizards are better than wizards and witches like me or your mother born from non-magical parents are, well, lesser than dirt to them. They even have a slur for it. They call us mudbloods. Unfortunately, they have a lot of political influence and ingrained these views into the common life in the wizarding worlds. Many of the purebloods' families were followers of Voldemort and managed to buy themselves free by pleading they were controlled through a spell. You probably met someone from a pure-blood family, since only them would talk about this kind of stuff while meeting someone," explained Matthew. "So that's how it was. Wait, you just said Voldemort's name. Aren't you scared?" asked Harry as he realized it. "From what? Like you, I grew up in the non-magical world and don't have that fear ingrained in me. They didn't say his name back then because Voldemort cast a taboo on his name and was able to locate people who would say his name. Usually, after saying his name, a group of Death Eater would arrive and attack you. Death Eater is how his followers are called," replied Matthew, half amused and half serious. They arrived at the apothecary where Harry bought his school ingredients. Matthew's discount made his shopping much cheaper. Next, they headed for Flourish and Blots where they would buy Harry school books. Matthew also picked up a collection of books as he did for Hermione that would introduce the wizarding world's customs and common sense to Harry. He also picked additionally some books that would give Harry a good foundation for the school topics, especially potions. You should read these books and your school books before the lessons begin, so you are prepared. Although it's not required, it will help you, especially in potions. The potion teacher is famous for picking on students who don't belong in his house Slytherin, and often quizzes new students to scare them. He is actually a good guy, but he needs to keep up a facade that he is partial to them because of politics, explained Matthew as they left the bookstore. House Slytherin. What's that about? Wondered Harry while staring at Matthew. Hogwarts has 4 houses that students get sorted into based on their character. They are Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, Slytherin, and the house I am in, Ravenclaw. Slytherin is a rather complex house because of politics. It's the house where Voldemort and most of his followers were in. I wouldn't go there if I were you, since many of their children are there now, although some of them are also decent and got sorted there because it fits their character, answered Matthew dutifully. How do I get sorted? Asked Harry. That's a surprise. Don't worry where you get sorted, every house has its advantage, replied Matthew while comforting the younger boy, who got a bit worried again. Afterward, they had a bit of time and Matthew invited Harry to a nice break at Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. As they finished their ice cream, they headed for Ollivander's wand store. So this is the last thing on your list and probably the most important one. Your wand. You should go yourself in, since it is a rather important and personal choice. You will probably also learn something about your parents there, since Mr. Ollivander remembers every wand he ever sold. Oh, and buy a wand holster, since a wand could, like a gun, accidentally fire off if you are not careful. A holster will prevent that, explained Matthew as he sent the boy into the old store, which existed since 382 BC. He waited here for a while and wondered whether would Hagrid or Harry would arrive first, since it was slowly time for their meeting. After a while, Harry once again left the store and arrived outside. So do you have your wand, Harry? Good. Oh, it seems Hagrid also arrived, exclaimed Matthew as he spotted the half-giant. Harry, I will leave you here. We will meet each other on the train. If not, then latest in Hogwarts. Keep your trunk shrunken with you so your relatives can't do anything to your stuff, said Matthew as he was about to leave. Yes, see you in Hogwarts. And thank you for your help, replied the younger boy happily. Chapter 53, End of Holidays. As Matthew arrived at home, he once again checked out the data he gathered on the Philosopher's Stone. According to Sarah's scan, the stone was a large concentration of crystallized energy. Specifically, life force, a form of energy inherent to all living beings. This form of energy was often used in the dark arts. According to Sarah's analysis, the stone contained the life's force equal to multiple 100,000 living beings. No wonder this stone was able to create something like an elixir of life. It was pure life force after all. This wasn't purely alchemy, this was also a large part of blood magic. Instead of transmuting only metal into gold, it sacrifices life force to create the necessary particles that every metal was missing. But how did Nicholas Flamel create a crystallized stone of it? And where did he get all this life force from? After all, if he killed so many people, that would be known. Instead of a famous immortal alchemist, he would be known as one of the most terrifying Dark Lords in history. How did he do it, wondered Matthew as he comprehended the true meaning of the data. Wait. Nicholas Flamel was born approximately in 1327. Between 1346 and 1353, that's when the Black Death killed over 25 million people in Europe. He was around 20 years old and just out of school. As a talented wizard, it wasn't hard to create a ritual to create the stone by sacrificing lives. A few 100,000 more death wouldn't matter among millions of death during the Black Death pandemic, and nobody would even question it if sewn right by Merlin's saggy balls. Nicholas Flamel was just a Dark Lord that succeeded with his aspiration without anybody knowing the truth. Until now. Probably only I know the truth, but Dumbledore maybe too. That's why he was so happy to let the Flamels die. Now everything makes sense, concluded Matthew as he realized the truth about the immortal alchemist. So I will have to change my plans. I don't need to save another Dark Lord. Originally I wanted to become his student and gain access to his century-old collection of books by secretly saving the stone and returning it to him. Complained Matthew mentally, well, I still can locate his books after he dies. And his largest secret is such a simple solution to immortality that just makes him disappointing. He probably picked up some useful knowledge over the centuries, but it's not worth it. I could create such a ritual myself, but everyone would label me a Dark Lord, and I don't want to rely on the elixir of life, mused Matthew. Well, I should still probably steal the stone. After all, why waste so many lives? If nobody wants it, I can take it. It's still a useful magical object. And creating a realistic decoy should be simple. After all, it's contained life force inside a crystallized stone made of the blood of thousands of people. But once it's destroyed, the life force would disperse and everything that remains is crystallized blood splitters. Decided Matthew as he planned his future. I will just have to preserve the timeline, so I have to steal it after Christmas, and I still need to create a method to bypass the mirror. After Matthew finished his plans, he joined his parents to dinner and spent the rest of the day with them, since he would be still busy the next month before he returns to Hogwarts. Scene break. The next few weeks were a busy time for Matthew. He spent a lot of time inside his room, where he created in one corner a permanent laboratory. With the help of transfiguration, he transformed some wood he picked up after visiting his father at work into a desk, a potion preparation station, and some drawers where he would keep his notes. Afterward, he created a fireplace for 4 different cauldrons, so he could work on multiple things similarly. He couldn't create more since even though his room was large, it still was limited. He still wasn't able to expand his room with magic. This was a rather complex branch of magic that fell into the category of space magic, and unfortunately not available in the Hogwarts library. There was an expansion charm, but it only worked on smaller objects like trunks, and a room would collapse in itself. This kind of magic was unfortunately family magic, that people kept to themselves. He could figure out how it worked, but it would cost him at least a few months. There was no point to it currently since the space he had at the moment was enough. But he should get one of the house trunks, like Newt Scamander had one, in the future. Analyzing one would probably cut down the time he needed massively, since they were different from expansion charms and most likely the magic he needed, but they were expensive as hell. It would most likely cost him his whole vault, so he chose to wait a bit and rather save his money for now. After he completed his laboratory, he began with his research, while he still continued with his experiments on souls and the strange stone. They became a side project for now. The first main objective during the rest of his holidays was to create and fake Philosopher's Stone, which was only distinguishable if you understand the real stone and how it was made or actually wanted to use it. Once it was destroyed, nobody would be able to tell the difference. For that, he definitely needed one ingredient that was a bit troublesome to get: human blood. Yes, he could use his own, but he didn't want to. And it would be more realistic if he could get multiple different blood samples of different people. Since the original was also created from the blood of thousands of different people. Luckily this was something he should be able to buy in Nocturne Alley. This was after all something vampires needed, which were some of the residents of the Shady Alley. After a short trip to the alley, he was able to acquire different kinds of blood samples. He visited multiple different stores to acquire a wide range of different blood, amongst them the apothecary he visited previously. The next few weeks were spent with trying different methods to create a possibly realistic stone. One of the materials he added was pure iron, since iron was contained in blood. With it he was able to lower his need for blood and substitute it with it. He also added some salt and sand to create the crystallization. Afterward, for the final stone he only needed to purify some magical ingredients so he would get the magical radiation from it. In the end, he was able to create a realistic stone with the help of Sarah. With that his main goal was complete, but he still had a few days before the next year in Hogwarts began. The rest of the holidays he began to research the remaining magical essence he had. After all, finding a method to strengthen himself was always needed, even though he had just recently completed a magical maturation. Unfortunately, his Azure Corn potion lost its effect, it was simply too weak. And the low-grade magical essence was too weak to create a more potent potion. But all his experiments failed, and in a few days, he found no real solution. But in the end, he still had time, since he just broke through and had a lot of space to grow. He was after all far superior to anyone his age, and before Voldemort returned he had enough time to reach a level of strength that guarantees his survival. Chapter 54, A New School Year. Sunday, the 1st of September, 1991. Matthew and his parents arrived at 10:30 at King's Cross railway station. Just as they parked their car and entered the station, he spotted the three Dursley leaving the station while laughing disgustingly. "Well, it seems Harry is already here," mused Matthew as he watched them drive away. They entered the station and walked towards platform 9 and 10, where he spotted Harry approaching a group of familiar redheads while looking somewhat nervous. Matthew quickly said goodbye to his parents and also approached the group just as Fred passed through the barrier. As he came in range he only saw Harry pass through the barrier between platform 9 and 10. I was a bit too slow. Well, I will meet him in Hogwarts at the latest, but probably in the train," thought Matthew as he greeted the rest of the Weasleys. Afterward, he also passed through the barrier and entered platform 9 3/4, where the red Hogwarts Express was already waiting. As he walked down the platform towards the end of the train to look for an empty compartment, he spotted Harry as he tried to lift his trunk up the steps but could hardly raise one end, and twice he dropped it painfully on his foot. Why didn't he shrink it? He must have forgotten it, wondered Matthew as he approached him. Just at that moment, he saw George speak to him. "Want a hand?" He heard him ask. "Hello Harry." "Hi George. How are you?" greeted Matthew as he arrived beside them. "Oi Matthew, had nice holidays? Come, let's give him a hand with his trunk," said George just as he realized that Matthew called the other person Harry. "Wait Harry!" exclaimed George as his eyes wandered to Harry's forehead where his lightning scar was located. "Blimey, you are Harry Potter." Yes. Nice to meet you." "Hello Matthew," said Harry, a bit embarrassed. "Why didn't you shrink and lighten your trunk?" asked Matthew. Harry suddenly had an embarrassed, sheepish look on his face. I forgot it." As he pulled his wand out and tapped the top side of his trunk as he shrunk down, he put it into his pocket. "George, you should go say your mom goodbye," you will have enough time to meet Harry in Hogwarts," said Matthew, "and Harry, you should look for other students of your year so you get to meet them." George joined Fred and they left to say goodbye to their mother while telling her that they just met Harry Potter as Harry entered the Hogwarts Express and chose an empty compartment. After leaving Harry in his compartment where he would meet Ron later, Matthew looked for his friends and found them in a compartment close by. They talked about their holidays while waiting for the train to start. At point 11 the Hogwarts Express began to move and left the King's Cross railway station in direction of Hogsmeade, which was somewhere in the north, in the Scottish Highlands. The train ride was pretty quiet. A bit later he saw 3 boys pass his compartment in direction of Harry's. 2 of them looked like small trolls and the middle one had a pale complexion and platinum blonde hair. "Well, Harry definitely won't land in Slytherin," concluded Matthew as he watched Draco Malfoy and his lackeys pass his compartment with amusement. As they came closer and closer to Hogwarts, their compartment door opened and a familiar brown-haired girl stood in the entrance with a shy dark-haired boy behind her. "Excuse me, has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one," she asked with a bossy tone as she watched the people in the compartment until her eyes stopped at Matthew. "Hello, Hermione, nice to see you. But usually, you knock before entering a compartment," greeted an amused Matthew. Hello Matthew. Sorry, I didn't mean to be impolite," replied a suddenly embarrassed Hermione. "About that toad. What's his name?" asked Matthew while he looked at Neville. His name is Trevor," answered Neville. "Let's see. Give me one moment," muttered Matthew as he stepped into the corridor. "Accio Trevor." He cast with his wand that appeared suddenly in his hand from his wand holster strapped to his wrist. He stretched his hand out, and a minute later a green toad flew directly into it from one end of the train. "Here, that seems to be Trevor," said Matthew with a smile as he handed the toad to Neville. "And the next time you have such a problem, you should visit the perfect compartment in front of the train. They should be able to help you with small problems like this." "What kind of spell was that? In which book do I find it?" asked and exited Hermione as she entered the compartment and sat beside Matthew. "It's the summoning charm Accio, you will learn it in your 4th year usually. You can find the spell in the Standard Book of Spells Grade 4. Explained Matthew patiently, as he and his friends gained new people to their compartment. Soon they arrived at Hogwarts, where Hermione and Neville left the group and joined Hagrid and the other first-year students. Matthew and his friends took the Thestral carriages and arrived at the ancient castle. Inside the Great Hall, they sat down at the Ravenclaw table and greeted the other students. While they were waiting for the feast to start, he chatted with Jo about their holiday. He takes a quick look at the teachers meanwhile. On the high table the teachers were already there. This year Kirill sat in the position of the teacher. He now had a turban on his head, unlike before he left for his sabbatical, which just meant that he was possessed by Voldemort. Matthew didn't look at him anymore since he didn't want to gain his attention. The rest of the teachers remained the same as last year. After a while, Professor McGonagall stood up and left the Great Hall to get the first-year students, who should have arrived with the boats. Soon she entered the hall once again and checked if everything was ready. After she left the hall once again, she entered a few seconds later with the first-year students. Matthew was able to recognize many of them based on the description from the books, like Susan Bones, Hannah Abbott, Tracy Davies, Daphne Greengrass, Blaise Zabinai, Seamus Finnegan, and many more. 40 first-year students in total entered the Great Hall through the big entrance. He heard how Hermione whispered about the enchanted ceiling. It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history, which made him smile since this was so Hermione-like. As the new students arrived at the high table, Professor McGonagall got the four-legged stool and put the sorting hat on it. The hat began to move and began to welcome the students with his song for this year. After he finished, he watched Ron as he looked visibly more at ease now, since he didn't need to fight a troll. Professor McGonagall stepped forward while holding a long roll of parchment and opened the sorting. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. She explained and began with the first names. Chapter 55, Sorting Feast. Professor McGonagall started with the sorting, Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones to Hufflepuff. Terry Boot to Ravenclaw and so on, pretty much like in the Harry Potter books. Granger, Hermione. She called now while reading from her list. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Her sorting took a while. Matthew was pretty sure in the original her sorting didn't take so long. Could it be, wondered Matthew as he watched the girl and the hat until suddenly the hat opened its mouth. Ravenclaw! It shouted out. And Hermione ran down the stairs and joined the Ravenclaw table while smiling at Matthew and waving at him. Matthew waved with a nice smile back. Oh shit. Keeping the canon timeline intact, my ass. I should have kept my distance. Blamed Matthew himself. Well, how should Ron and Harry even survive their school years? Harry will either drop from his broom or get strangled by the devil's snare protecting the Philosopher's Stone. Now I will have to take a more active role. Maybe Hermione can still become friends with them, wondered Matthew as he began to plan what he should do now. While he was in his thoughts, the sorting continued. Neville landed in Gryffindor but forgot to take off the sorting hat as he ran off to the table. He had to return and put the hat back on the chair under the laughter of the other students. Malfoy landed in Slytherin before the sorting hat was even completely touched his head. The sorting continued like in canon. Potter, Harry. Read Professor McGonagall out loudly from her scroll. The hall became instantly quiet and whisper broke out like hissing fire all over the hall. Potter, did she say? Asked a voice. Another one asked, the Harry Potter. Harry walked forward and placed himself on the chair as the whole hall tried to get a good look at him, and Professor McGonagall put the sorting hat on his head. Where do you guys think he will be sorted? Asked Roger as he stared at the dark-haired boy with the hat on his head. Gryffindor, commented Matthew nonchalantly. I met him in Diagon Alley, and he has the disposition of a Gryffindor, and both his parents were in the house. Maybe Ravenclaw, but doubtful. Although he is smart, he isn't interested in studies. Explained Matthew to his friends. Although maybe he will put more effort in than in canon, at the same time Hermione is missing, so his grades will probably drop, but at the same time he also may become better since he has to rely more on himself. Will Ron even graduate? Pondered Matthew as he realized that possibility while his friends continued the discussion. Suddenly the hat shouted, better be Gryffindor. Harry took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He looked relieved, as the whole Gryffindor table broke out in cheers, the loudest cheers in the whole sorting. Percy got even up and shook Harry's hands vigorously. What an ass-kisser. No wonder he becomes the personal secretary of the minister later on. The twins yelled, we got Potter. We got Potter. As Harry sat down opposite of Nicholas de Mimsy-Porpington, or short Sir Nicholas, the ghost of House Gryffindor, also known as the near-headless Nick, who patted Harry on his arm. Even the people on the teacher table paid special attention to Harry now. Hagrid gave Harry a thumbs up while Dumbledore even raised his cup for him. Well, Slytherin will this year not win the House Cup, since Dumbledore would give his golden boy preferential treatment this year. But maybe Ravenclaw also had a chance to win if Matthew and Hermione would be able to contribute to the whole stone drama. The sorting continued as only 4 students were remaining. Dean Thomas, a black boy even taller than Ron, landed in Gryffindor, and Lisa Turpin, a dark-haired girl with glasses, joined the Ravenclaw table. Then it was Ron's turn, who, like all Weasleys, landed in Gryffindor. The loudest cheered his brothers and Harry for him. Last but not least, Blaise Zabini, a dark-skinned boy, landed in Slytherin. He was the son of the famous Black Widow, who had already 6 different husbands at this point in time. Matthew wondered how she actually looked. Fun fact: as Matthew read the first Harry Potter book in his last life, Blaise Zabini was translated as a girl in his mother language, since his gender wasn't clear in the first book. Now that the sorting was complete, Professor McGonagall put her scroll and the sorting hat away. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms opened wide as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are: Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak. Thank you." He sat back down and waved his hands as the food appeared on the tables. Everybody clapped and cheered. "Is getting Dumbledore mad?" asked Cho besides him. "No. Dumbledore wants to point out a rather troublesome problem between the 4 houses." These 4 words may sound mad but have a deep meaning. "Hey are other," another word for other. Dumbledore points out the division between the houses. Began Matthew to explain. Ravenclaw is a house of intellect and would see the members of other houses as nitwits sometime. Gryffindor is a rather athletic house, while blubber is another word for fat used on British playgrounds. The members of House Slytherin love pure blood, and for them is another an oddment, which means in the world of sewing cloth remains. While for Hufflepuff their unity is very important to them, while the members of the other houses would need to be tweaked to fit in. So tweak is other for Hufflepuffs. Rather than mad, Dumbledore is brilliant, explained Matthew to his group of friends, while the rest of the table also listened in wonder. It was visible how the respect for Dumbledore grew on the whole table, and some of the students even fell in thought while comprehending the deeper meaning of the words. The feast continued while Matthew paid attention to the Gryffindor table. Harry watched the head table. As he stared at Snape and Quirrell, his hand suddenly clapped at his head and he asked Percy something. "So that confirms it. Voldemort is here," concluded Matthew. As everyone finished and the food on the tables vanished, Dumbledore got to his feet again. "Ahem. Just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start-of-term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. And a few of our older students would do well to remember that as well." Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins and then at Matthew. "Oh, shit, wasn't as sneaky as I thought. Damn right, the wards monitor the location of every student. Although he wouldn't be able to know where every student is 24/7, he would know if someone leaves the wards. Hopefully, he didn't follow me," thought Matthew. "I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death." With that, the feast come to its conclusion. After the school song, the students left the Great Hall. The first-year students followed the prefects to their respective common rooms. Matthew and his friends left for the Ravenclaw common room and retired for the night. Chapter 56, Updating the Minimap. Monday, the 2nd of September, 1991. After his morning workout that Matthew kept up to keep his body in top condition, he headed to the Great Hall for breakfast, where he also acquired the new schedule for his third year. This year he had 2 additional classes on his plan which would take more of his time. At least he wasn't so insane to take all classes just to acquire a time tuner to study. He hoped that Hermione would get one in her third year and he would then have the opportunity to study it. After all, he wasn't ready to study time at the moment, he had enough on his plate. Today he only had History of Magic, where he spent his time reading the new books from the library that arrived this year, since Mrs. Pince would add new books to the Hogwarts library every year to keep it updated. After all, Hogwarts was one of the biggest and oldest magical libraries in the world. Since Matthew needed something to do in History of Magic, he didn't scan them directly, since they, either way, would only add a small amount of new knowledge to his extensive database. Besides History of Magic, he also had Defense Against the Dark Arts, with the annoyingly stuttering Kirill Mort. To not get unwanted attention from him, Matthew had no other choice than to endure this completely boring and useless class while pretending to take notes from Kirill Mort's incomprehensible stutters. Mondays would be the most troublesome days this year, since he had the most useless classes on them this year. Once his classes were finished, he excused himself from his friends and headed for one of the unused classrooms. He couldn't risk entering the room of requirement this year with the high risk of Kirill Mort discovering him. Since Matthew wasn't sure how much attention Voldemort would pay to the room where his Horcrux was hidden. Kirill was just a disposable pawn for him, so he would most likely check out if the Horcrux was safe, since dead men tell no tales. And Kirill would, because of the possession through Voldemort and the unicorn blood they would consume later to keep the body intact, die either way. Matthew didn't want to lose the advantage of the room of requirements this year completely. So he needed a way to monitor the location of Kirill Mort 24/7. There were multiple examples of people who accomplished that in Hogwarts, like Dumbledore or any other headmaster and the Marauders. They all used the same method. Matthew figured out how they did it already before he completed reading the Hogwarts library, since the method was obvious. He just didn't have a use for his own Marauders map, since he would have to invest a lot of time to create one with an incomplete database. But now that his database was so extensive, it was pretty simple. The magic they used was simply the Hogwarts wards, which monitored the insides of the castle and the safety of the students. Every headmaster was connected to these 1,000-year-old wards, which only became more powerful over the ages. This was just one of the perks and requirements for being a headmaster, and was clearly recorded in older versions of Hogwarts, a history which he acquired through the Room of Requirements in the past. Probably because of the recent Wizarding War and global Dark Lords like Grindelwald, this information was removed for safety measurements. This was also the proof that Dumbledore planned Voldemort's death, probably since he got the confirmation of the existence of his Horcruxes in Harry's second year through the diary. Dumbledore knew that Barty Crouch Jr. was pretending as Mad-Eye Moody, but needed Voldemort to return with Harry's blood so the young boy got a chance for survival. That's also why Matthew needed to keep the canon timeline mostly intact until Voldemort's returned. Once he resurrected himself with Harry's blood, he was as good as dead. The Marauders, on the other hand, were quite the brilliant students to figure it out. Although it wasn't hard to connect to the wards once you are inside them, figuring out how they worked and what they did was a genius move. The rest of the map was simply a visual representation of the information shared by the wards, with a few concealment charms and enchantments that would also insult someone who tried to access it forcibly. But nothing useful to take a closer look at, so he didn't steal it like an idiot for anything substantial to gain. Weeks ago Matthew created with the help of Sarah's calculation a spell to connect himself to the Hogwarts wards without Dumbledore or any headmaster who was controlling the wards being aware of it. All he needed for it was to be inside of them. Since Dumbledore was most likely aware of the Marauder's map and could cancel the connection any time, which Matthew didn't want to. Although he had nothing against Dumbledore, the less control and information the old schemer had over him the better. Unfortunately, Matthew wouldn't be able to gain control over the wards, only their information. To gain control over wards, a wizard needed to be keyed into the wardstone, which was located in the headmaster office, the safest place in the castle. On one of his explorations of the castle, Matthew found out that the office had another extra set of wards just to protect the office. This means there should be 2 wardstones there, and the office was impossible to break in without the knowledge of the headmaster. After a few minutes, Matthew was able to establish the connection with the wards with his spell. Sarah used the data acquired through the Hogwarts wards and update my minimap with it. Create a new subroutine for it and stop the echolocation subroutine inside the castle since it would be redundant now. Beep. Confirming task. Connection established and subroutine created. Updating map. Task complete, minimap updated. Suddenly the minimap inside Matthew's mind changed and he gained a ton of new information on it. He knew a lot of secret corridors and rooms inside the castle already, but a ton of new ones appeared thanks to the connection. The room of requirements wasn't there, which meant that the headmaster was unaware of it and couldn't monitor it, and since it was inside the wards nobody left them and he wouldn't be alarmed. Thanks to the AI chip, Matthew had now a minimap of Hogwarts which allowed him to monitor the location of every person in the castle 24/7. Something a normal wizard couldn't do. Although they were more powerful than normal humans, in the end, they were still base human and couldn't split their awareness. So Dumbledore wasn't able to permanently monitor the castle like Matthew could with Sarah's assistance. Now that he had his minimap, he was able to be always aware of Kirillmort's location and could dodge him permanently. Matthew could now use the room of requirements without trouble. If Kirillmort was headed there or came close, Sarah would alarm him and all he had to do was open a portal and head for a remote classroom. Matthew was now basically uncatchable inside Hogwarts for anybody besides the headmaster, who could also apparate inside Hogwarts or use Phoenix travel. Lucky for Matthew was also that Voldemort was too arrogant to create something like a Marauder's map to monitor the castle. Without a doubt, he was capable of it, but probably already too mad thanks to his split soul. For the rest of the day, Matthew practiced a few more complex spells since he now had the reserves of a 5th-year student and was able to do it without a strain on himself. After all, the regular practice would allow his reserves to grow faster, and the bigger the spell the more magic he used. Once curfew approached, he returned to the Ravenclaw Tower and rested for the day. Chapter 57, Ancient Runes. Tuesday, the 3rd of September, 1991. Matthew woke up quite excited today since he would have for the first time one of his electives, Ancient Runes. He already prepared a few questions for Professor Bathsheba babbling their Ancient Runes lecture. But first, he would have a nice double lesson of charms with Professor Flitwick and a bit of herbology in between. After breakfast, they headed for classroom 2E, which was located in the charms corridor on the 3rd floor close to the training grounds tower. Coincidentally, Matthew and his friends had to pass the forbidden corridor where the Philosopher's Stone was guarded or will be guarded in the future. Since Matthew wasn't sure if the stone was already there at this point, since the Mirror of Erist only gets moved there after the Christmas break. He didn't believe the stone would just lay there in the last room on the ground, only guarded by traps that even first-year students could pass. While passing the forbidden corridor, Matthew quickly cast a hominum revelio in the direction of the door wandless so his friends wouldn't notice it. The reading he got from the spell told him that Fluffy, the Cerberus with the worst name for a deadly three-headed dog who supposedly guards the entrance to hell or the underworld in Greek mythology, was already guarding the trapdoor. After a few moments, he realized that he just could have used his minimap to confirm that, which also showed that Fluffy was located in the room. He was the only living thing inside the 7 rooms, which was strange since there should be also a troll guarding one of the rooms. They probably still didn't put it there. Or rather Kirill, since this was his contribution to protect the stone. They arrived at their charms class, which soon started. During the first lesson they had a bit of revision of the last years. They repeated spells like the levitation charm. After making sure that everyone still could cast the spells, the small professor began with the new spells for their 3rd year. The first spell they would learn this year was the cheering charm. According to Flitwick, the charm was created by Felix Summerby in the mid-1500s and created a feeling of great contentment. If he remembered right, this was one of the charms which would appear at the end of the year exams, which was logical since they were easy to practice and harmless. This gave Matthew an idea for a future project which could earn him massive amounts of money in the non-magical world. Wasn't this basically what some drugs did, just that this didn't harm the consumer's health? He definitely should create a potion with a similar effect and fill it into pills that he would sell. Happiness was something many people would want, but this idea had to wait until he was of legal age or at least close by and powerful enough to give a shit about ministries, since they would most likely try to restrict him. As charms finished, they had an hour of herbology before lunch. Nothing special happened in class. They only started with puffapods, a magical plant that produced large pink seed pods full of shining beans, which instantly flowered when they came into contact with any solid object. The spores of a puffapod could cause dizziness and could also be used in potion making. Trolls appeared to be allergic to puffapods, sneezing whenever they bloom. Matthew stored a few seeds of it instantly in his pocket. Once they finished with their lunch break, it was finally time for ancient runes, the lesson Matthew anticipated the most today. Runes class was in classroom 6am, which was on the 6th floor. The class wasn't so full as the other classes, so members of all 4 houses shared this class. Still, most of the Ravenclaws took this class, which wasn't strange since they always are studious. Matthew and his friends took 2 desks in the front of the class so they wouldn't miss it. All of his friends took runes, but unfortunately, instead of arithmancy they rather took care of magical creatures with Professor Kettleburn. After a while, Professor Bathsheba Babbling entered the classroom and the students became quiet. Bathsheba Babbling was an average-height woman that was fair-skinned. She has brown hair and eyes. Bathsheba looked as she was getting on in age, as she had some wrinkles on her face that could vanish with a simple potion and no one would know it was ever there. Take your seats. My name is Bathsheba Babbling and I will be teaching you about ancient runes and some common runes used today. She started the class. In ancient times, runes were the main method to cast spells. Later on, it was replaced by charms, a method that worked with less preparation. Ancient wizards had different methods to cast spells with the help of runes. Some enchanted artifacts with spells, some tattooed rune clusters onto their skin to channel magic through it for specific spells, Then some wizards used disposable objects like rune stones here in Britain or Nordic countries, while in Asia they used paper talismans which some spellcaster even use until today. After runes got replaced by charms, their main application shifted to enchanting and warding. You find today runes usually on ward stones. This is what is professionally called a centralized ward schemes. Some powerful ancient ward schemes are distributed over large areas. Hogwarts wards are a mix of both, which is also possible. She explained. Another usage would be small rune clusters for specific usage. Many wizarding communities use, for example, runic lights and similar applications. The advantage of runes in enchanting and warding is that they are physically anchored into the enchanted object and last longer. This would be also possible with enchanting through charms, but it takes a lot more energy. You see, there are many different methods of how runes could be used even today. Does anyone have a question? She finished her introduction into the topic of ancient runes. Matthew instantly raised his hand. Yes, dear, could you introduce yourself first? Requested the professor as she pointed at Matthew. My name is Matthew Mason. I have a question regarding the different rune languages. After reading many different books on the topic of runes, I found that all major magical cultures had at least one set of runic languages over their history. Egypt had hieroglyphs. In Britain, France, and the Germanic countries where the different versions of Futhark spread, like Elder Futhark, Younger Futhark, or the medieval one which was still used during the founding of Hogwarts. Ancient Greece had their own runic system. In Asia they used older versions of the languages they use even today. In America, the Maya and Aztecs had their own writing culture, although the Aztecs rather used blood as a medium for their magic. Of all these past magical cultures I could find records of their language at least partially. Only about the ancient Norse runic system, I didn't find anything. Not even a letter. Why is that? Asked Matthew after a rather lengthy description. Ah, that is an interesting question, my boy. You won't find a definitive answer anywhere, since all that remains are legends. According to them, the Norse gods themselves, after either a great war or a disaster caused by Norse magic user, removed all records about the runic language. This is the most detailed answer you will find anywhere. Has anybody else a question? Asked the professor after answering Matthew. While the class continued, Matthew stayed in his thoughts. There was probably some kind of disaster that wiped all records of the runic language out. And the legends then turned this into something that the Norse gods themselves removed the language. After all, there are no Norse gods or Asgard. Or are there? Asked Matthew himself, as he had to think about the dark shadow that tried to invade his mind as he read the Scroll of Sins. Well, it isn't impossible. I shouldn't forget the possibility completely, but I have no proof or even a clue of their existence at the moment besides this legend, which could be interpreted differently. Mused Matthew as he continued to listen to the class. He would need to look for different sources of what really happened to the Norse runic language, since he would most likely find not much about it in Hogwarts, since it happened long before it. Chapter 58, School Life. The first week continued without troubles for Matthew. Yes, Kirill's classes were annoying, but so was History of Magic, where a ghost would bore you to death. Potions with Snape was also a bit bad this year, since he seemed to have always a bad mood, most likely because of Harry's presence. Arithmancy was a decent addition to Matthew's curriculum, but nothing extraordinary. If you knew maths from the non-magical, especially of higher years, which Matthew studied in advance since it would be useful for him, you would have no troubles with arithmancy. The class mainly focused on the magical properties of numbers, calculating the future, and numerology. So basically the basics. In their 6th year they would only begin with the necessary calculations for spell creations. Although Matthew gained a bit of valuable insight from Professor Septima Vector's experience, it was mainly a class to look good on his resume, if you would like to say so. He would have rather chosen another class, but there was not really a more useful alternative. Alchemy was only taught in the 6th and 7th years if there were enough interested and qualified students there. Dueling was completely removed from the curriculum for decades, and the rest possible choices just were not good enough to spend time in. Matthew would rather spend time in a subject where he could still gain at least small insights into useful topics than none or completely useless. After all, he had to choose at least 2 electives. With the AI chip, he would always have that problem no matter which school he attended. His learning speed was just impossible to keep up with. The scanning spell that instantly allows him to read books didn't help the matter. For him to significantly progress knowledge-wise, he would have to research himself or find rare books and information on topics he didn't have. The only places in Hogwarts that could possibly fulfill that, he wasn't sure, since the canon was never specific on that or didn't mention it, were either the Room of Lost Things, which he, unfortunately, couldn't access until Voldemort left the castle, since he wasn't sure if the Horcrux could communicate with Voldemort if he was close, or the Chamber of Secrets. Although Matthew wasn't sure if the chamber contained a library or anything besides a deadly 1,000-year-old basilisk. He could probably access it now, but he did not want to fight the basilisk for now, since he was only 30% sure of surviving the conflict. He was 90% he could kill the basilisk, but he was unsure if he would survive the fight himself. For a library, he was unsure it even existed or if he could read it, since it could be written in parcel according to some fanfictions Matthew read in his past life. The risk wasn't worth it for now. Matthew spent also some time again this year studying with Cho. This year they put their study sessions on Thursday after class, so Matthew would have the whole weekend available if he needed it. They got also joined by someone else, besides their friends who joined them if they needed it, Hermione to be precise, who hadn't the easiest time even in Ravenclaw thanks to her natural bossy tone and the need to prove herself. But Cho was pretty nice to her, and Matthew was already her first friend, so the beginning of her first year wasn't as bad in the original work. Scene break. The next week on Thursday evening a new rumor spread through Hogwarts. Harry Potter became the youngest Seeker in a century. During the first year flying lesson, Harry caught Neville's Remembrall with his natural talent on the broom. This whole spectacle was witnessed by Professor McGonagall, who instead of punishing him added him to the team. Which was supposed to be a secret, but nothing could stop the Hogwarts rumor mill. This was unimportant for Matthew, who currently used the Room of Requirements once again. After all, he could now always monitor Quirrell Mort's location. He was currently starting to practice silently casted magic. Now that he completed his first magical maturity, he reached the level of an O.W.L student. The minimal required level to cast magic silently effectively. Matthew began with his first-year spells. The energy consumption for silently casted magic tripled, at least additional to the higher consumption of his wandless casting. To master a spell silently he needed at least a few tries. After all, it was much harder with the limitations on his brain. At the same time, it did real wonders on his magical control. His control improved through leaps and bounds with this harder form of magic casting. Today he practiced magic until midnight, since there was something he wanted to confirm. Shortly before midnight, he used a disillusionment charm, silencing charm, and a self-created presence erasure charm that also removed his smell. He headed for the trophy room where Harry and Ron should arrive for their duel with Malfoy. The corridors were fitted with bars of moonlight from the high windows as Matthew arrived on the third floor where the trophy room was. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, and statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls as Matthew waited invisible for his targets to arrive. He hadn't to wait long as 3 small first-year students arrived in the room. This time Hermione wasn't present, it was only Harry, Ron, and Neville who again probably forgot the password to their common room. "He's late, maybe he's chickened out," Ron whispered after they waited for a few minutes. A noise in the next room made the 3 first-year students jump. Filch and his disgusting cat arrived. "Sniff around, my sweet, they might be lurking in a corner," said Mr. Filch, who clearly got informed of their presence as he neared the trophy room. The 3 first years followed Harry out of the trophy room. In the gallery full of armors, Neville accidentally fell and toppled over a suit of armor. The noise was loud enough to wake up the castle. "Run!" yelled Harry as the 3 of them began to flee in direction of the forbidden corridor. "So I was right. Dumbledore doesn't want to only take out Nicholas Flamel, but also test Harry and confirm that Voldemort is alive, and most likely the connection between the two," mused Matthew as he followed behind the 3 first years. He could clearly feel the effect of a timed compulsion charm on them that draw them to the forbidden corridor. The final piece of proof Matthew needed was that the door this time wasn't even locked. As Peeves shouted that there were first years out of the bed, they quickly hid inside the room. Since Hermione wasn't here, nobody would be able to unlock the door for them. Matthew watched them hide inside the room where Fluffy was. Soon after, a pissed off Filch passed the corridor after Peeves tricked him. A few minutes later, the 3 Gryffindors fled out of the forbidden room from a 3-headed dog that tried to eat them. They quickly fled in direction of the 7th floor to get as much distance from the monstrous dog. Matthew made sure they arrived safely before he left for his own common room. The events of canon all ran according to plan. He was unsure if he needed to interfere and give them a few hints since Hermione wasn't currently with them. But maybe Dumbledore, the old schemer, had already all planned out for them. While thinking of many possible plans and contingencies, Matthew fell slowly asleep as his eyes felt heavier and heavier. Chapter 59, Magic and More Spells. A week after the Golden Duo, maybe trio if Neville joins them, discovered the trapdoor behind Fluffy, another important event happened for Matthew. He finally mastered the 2nd level of his current occlumency training. It was time to apply the 3rd and final level on his brain. But that gave him another problem. Although he was always aware where Kirillmort was located and could react, but only if he could move. That was something he couldn't do while applying the spell, since it required his whole concentration and he was restricted into a rune formation. Moving during the spell would most likely cause permanent harm to his brain, something he absolutely didn't need. Although the chances that Kirillmort would check out the Room of Requirements during his ritual was low, it wasn't impossible. So that was something Matthew didn't want to risk. He also thought about using the ruins of the Black Castle, but the Forbidden Forest was also a place where Kirillmort visited frequently and hunted unicorns to keep himself alive. And Dumbledore was also aware if Matthew left the wards, although last year he did nothing, this year with Voldemort's presence it could be different. It wasn't impossible that the headmaster would apparate to Matthew and discover the ruins and with it the scroll, something absolutely couldn't allow. In the end, he concluded his best choice was to use a secret corridor in some unused part of the castle and seal it up from the inside so nobody could interrupt him. The only people who would be able to locate him were the twins Fred and George with the Marauders map. but he was confident that they wouldn't be able to follow him if he sealed the entrances with rune formations. He decided he would use runes from the Elder Feudarch. With chaos runes most people couldn't break them, but he was unsure if someone like Dumbledore was able to find traces of them even if he removed them afterward. So he would use the most powerful and oldest rune system he knew besides chaos runes. Since the expertise of the twins should lay in potions and spell creation, he was confident they wouldn't be able to follow him and break his rune seal while performing the ritual. He was sure they could do it if they had enough time, but the time he needed to complete the ritual was too short. Quirrell Mort had no way to locate him or any reason, and Dumbledore would do nothing since he had no reason to spy on students while they were inside the wards. Once Matthew chooses a location, he let Sarah prepare a sealing formation in Elder Feudarch. On Friday after classes he headed for the secret corridor he chose in an unused part of the castle. It was unused since there were far fewer students in the castle than in previous centuries, because of the many deaths during the last few risings of different Dark Lords. He entered the secret passage that was located behind a statue of a scary-looking gargoyle that opened once he poked the gargoyle in the eye. The inside of the passage was dusty and dark, but quite big enough space for the isolation rune formation he would need to prepare. First Matthew carved the sealing runes on both the entrances of the secret passage, next he prepared the isolation formation. Now that everything was ready, he quickly checked his mental map to make sure nobody was close by and then began applying the third level of the spell. The whole process took multiple hours. He finished early on the next morning. Matthew was quite exhausted since the spell took a lot out of him. His senses and magic control were very restricted once more. He felt as if he was staring through a light mist. He also had a new strange feeling inside of him. He was pretty sure this had to do with his soul. Since this was what the third part of his occlumency technique had to do with, and the final level of the second part is partially there to prepare himself for it and grant him the ability to slightly control his soul without the use of spells. After he once again familiarized himself to an adequate level with his body, he headed out of the corridor after removing the rune formations. He was happy that he was so careful because according to Sarah the Weasley twins tried to enter the secret passage while he was applying the spell. As he stepped out of the passage realized his mistake just now. If the twins couldn't enter they obviously would have prepared a prank for him on the entrance, but thanks to his restricted mind he realized it too slow. He already stepped out of the corridor onto something. Matthew only heard a poof and smoke raised around him. After the smoke disappeared Matthew looked at himself. His skin and clothes were now red and golden colored. After conjuring a mirror he checked his hair which was now bright red. "Oh, just you wait, it's on. I will get the both of you," cursed Matthew as he returned to the common room where he was greeted by laughter. He prepared a counter potion without trouble, but enough people had seen him that the story still spread through the castle. At lunch, both troublemakers grinned at him, while Hermione was shocked and told him to go to the teachers. Tilda scene break Tilda. After this whole episode, Matthew's life continued normally. He would avenge himself in the future, but for now he had other things to do. He needed to broaden his spell repertoire. Although he had some powerful spells, most of his offensive spells were very deadly and his defensive spell was for a wide range of attacks that cost them defensive power. Over the next few weeks Matthew created some new spells with rather specific functions. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name: Cursed Chains, Weakening, Incantation, Maltina Infirmus, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 3.3 units, Description: a spell that conjures cursed chains that binds the targets. The chains are infused with a multitude of curses, although a bit darker in nature, not overly that would make it an illegal or dark spell. The curses are mainly weakening, binding, paralyzing, and shocking curses. This spell is very useful to restrict and capture a target without killing it. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name, Cursed Chains, Life Drain, Incantation, Maltina Exori, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 4.5 units. Description, a spell that conjures cursed chains that binds the targets. The chains are infused with a multitude of curses. The curses on this version of the spell are very dark in nature. The curses not only weaken and bind the target, they also slowly drain the target of its life force. Unfortunately, the life force can't be added to the casters because of the incompatibility between life forces, but it can be converted into magical energy, which allows the caster to replenish his reserves while the target is slowly dying. The caster can control the rate of absorption, although the highest level is still slow and would take a few hours to kill a target with multiple decades of life remaining. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name, Physical Shield, Incantation, Corpo Aegis, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 7.5 units. Description, a high consumption spell that creates a shield that can block most physical attacks. Attacks of magical nature will just pass through the shield. The shield is designed to block huge projectiles or hits. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name, Titan Fist, Incantation, Gigangus, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 2.1 units. Description, a spell based on magical construct magic. It conjures a giant fist and hits the target with it before it dissipates a few seconds later. It may be deadly for smaller targets. Matthew was happy with his new creations since these would be very useful additions for his repertoire. He spent the next few weeks mastering them in all forms, be it with wand or without, silent or spoken. He practiced them all. Chapter 60, Birthday and Halloween. In October Matthew had his birthday. He mainly became books from Cho and his friends, which he didn't read yet since Flourish and Blots would always get some new books to their assortment. His parents bought him a computer since the World Wide Web, and the first web page was launched to the public on the 6th of August, 1991. His parents believed that would be something he would be interested in besides magic, and they were absolutely right. From Hermione, who last minute discovered he would have a birthday soon, he got a nice homework planner and organizer in a dark blue color. Shortly after his birthday, Matthew finally completed the last level of the second part of his occlumency technique. Just a bit over 4 weeks ago he applied the spell in the secret passage. And now he mastered it. The complete second stage took him less than a half year to finish. He once again used the secret passage to remove the spell, just in case something would go wrong, but luckily everything went fine. Matthew's brain reached now a level that surpasses normal humans. No, he wasn't smarter or had a higher IQ, that wasn't what the spell was for. He had a faster processing speed on his thoughts since they didn't waste any time by using inefficient pathways. The speed he processes new information in at least doubled. Now he was able to make full use of his 5 senses because he could process far more of their information than normally. Not only that, he got far greater control over his body, mind, magic, and most importantly soul. He now was able to feel his soul and slightly control it and empower his other abilities, since the soul contained another form of energy, With that he was not only able to strengthen his mental defenses but also his normal magic casting. But this was just the entry level. All he could do was use a few minuscule percentages of his soul's strength. But with the control he gained, he was now able to practice the third level of his occlumency technique. This level would take far longer than the other ones and was far more dangerous since he was practicing control over his soul. Sarah designed when she created his occlumency technique a training method that slowly allowed him to gain control over his soul and access its full strength. Unfortunately, this was also a two-sided sword. If he used too much power of his soul would collapse and he would technically die. That's why this was so dangerous and the training method was carefully created. He would need to learn to perfectly control it so he wouldn't overuse his soul. He would also gain other benefits from that, but for now, they were in the far future. Thanks to his now perfect magic control, his spells would only use half the energy than normally. Although his spells didn't become more powerful, he now was able to cast twice the amount and his reaction speed was far better than before. Only people who were empowered by artifacts or had undergone rituals should be able to react as fast as him. But most Arrows still could overpower him, but he now should be able to fight an Arrow-level wizard on an equal level. Most likely they could still beat him thanks to their experience and extensive training. Scene break. Thursday, the 31st of October, 1991. On Halloween, a delicious smell of baking pumpkin wafting through the corridors. The whole castle was decorated with pumpkins like every year, and the whole castle was in a festive mood. Today was the day where the division between life and death was the weakest. According to some historical records in the library, ancient necromancers used this day for many rituals. But most necromancers were hunted down and their records were destroyed centuries before Hogwarts was even founded. Matthew was sad that so much knowledge was lost over the ages because it was deemed too dangerous or evil. Matthew only had arithmancy, transfiguration, and herbology today. He was pretty relaxed since nobody was in danger today since Hermione had almost nothing to do with Harry and Ron since she got sorted into Ravenclaw. He kept an eye on Kirillmort for the whole day with his mental map. Thanks to keeping an eye on him, he now realized how he smuggled the troll into the castle through the wards without alarming Dumbledore. He was utterly disappointed. Although the method Kirillmort used was very effective, it was so simple, there was no genius feat of ward breaking or even any kind of magic. All he saw from Voldemort were rather simple non-magical solutions. How he even became a Dark Lord level threat was confusing for him. All he did in the books was throw Avada Kedavras left and right. The only impressive duel was against Dumbledore, who was an over 100 years old geezer. All a bit impressive feats of magic already happened. Since he lost his body, he was an utter disappointment and only chose simple solutions. The more he learned the truth about the events in the original books, the more he wondered if he was overestimating Voldemort as a threat. But there was still the prophecy, and Matthew knew that he couldn't kill Voldemort himself since fate was an important thing in many worlds. With the existence of higher beings, which the Scroll and the Deathly Hallows proved for him, he was sure there was also an existence that enforced fate in some form. Well, Kirillmort sneaked the troll through the wards with permission from Dumbledore. He currently was transporting 2 trolls into the castle. One was left in an abandoned classroom in an unused part of the castle on the first floor, probably knocked out until Kirillmort needed his distraction. The other followed him to the forbidden 3rd floor corridor. The anti-creature wards for trolls were most likely deactivated by Dumbledore himself since the trolls wouldn't be able to enter the castle. That was just such a simple solution. Later Kirill could just say that another troll must have followed him into the castle if he should failed to acquire the Philosopher's Stone. Since the monitoring wards didn't distinguish between creatures and humans inside the wards only during entering, Dumbledore would also not be alarmed. The rest of the day passed without trouble for Matthew, and soon the Halloween feast started. 1,000 live bats fluttered from the walls and ceiling while 1,000 more swooped over the tables in low black clouds, making the candles in the pumpkins stutter. The feast appeared suddenly on the golden plates, as it had at the start of term banquet. Matthew made sure if everyone on the Gryffindor table was present, or if someone had replaced Hermione. But it seems everyone was here. But why do Harry and Ron look so guilty, wondered Matthew as he observed the two. Oh shit. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw have charms together. Realized Matthew. Ron most likely insulted Hermione again. Just then Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. Everyone stared as he reached Professor Dumbledore's chair, slumped against the table, and gasped, "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He then sank to the floor in a dead faint. That's it guys. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me in the comments what you want to see next and if you have any recommendations.